I will bring the meeting to order and welcome back to those of you who are viewing us via the Council YouTube channel. To start today, we have a public forum, and we have Rachel Butler, the General Manager, and Jamie Reid, the DCC Rep and a Trustee of the Startup Trust, to speak to us. Welcome to the table. You have 5 minutes to present to us, and then we will have, if you want to accept questions, we'll have 5 minutes allowed for questions. You'll need to press the button in the centre to turn on your microphone, and the floor's yours.
Perfect. Tēnā koutou pukinga mā. Nā mihi ke te mana whenua ko Kaitahu, ko Rachel tēnei, ko Jamie tērā, no Startup Dunedin mātou. I hara ahau I te tangata mōhio ki te kōrero te reo Māori. E tika ana kia mihi atu, kia mihi mai, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for making time. We're going to try and keep it succinct for you all. I'm Rachel, this is Jamie, who's the DCC representative on the Startup Dunedin board, and Wade Pearson, our chair, sends his apologies, but his new baby is due any minute, so we thought that was a pretty good excuse. I wanted to open today by thanking you all for the continued support for entrepreneurship and innovation in our city, in particular for the certainty that the 3-year SLA has provided, the confidence that this gives our team, our startups and our communities, knowing that council-backed startups are very much going to be part of the fabric for our city. It also continues to reinforce the unique position that our city has because the Dunedin City Council gives entrepreneurship such a focus. It also allows us to plan and to continue to improve the way that we nurture the ecosystem and support our founders, as you'll see to our report. We're grateful to speak to this today, to meet with you all and hopefully explore how we might continue to sustain and develop resilience in our city. So the report you've been given is the story from 2021 calendar year, and I just wanted to speak to the highlights and talk through some of the numbers. So you'll see we've supported 410 founders, but this looks like everything from very light touch to those that are heavily involved in our programming. All these founders have been through capability building, through events, or through some of our structured programs. So breaking down what those numbers look like, 170 of them have come through Audacious, our tertiary program. It's existed online, in person, and in hybrids, and most recently this year it's been repurposed as well as a self-paced course so we can support students as they battle through COVID and isolation periods. Outside of our programs, we've met with 84 founders one-on-one. It's never too early or too late for a founder to reach out to Startup Dunedin. Before anyone meets with us, we have them complete a one-page business plan. So you're probably familiar with what a lean canvas is. We call ours a startup canvas, and we've removed all the jargon. This isn't a test or a gatekeeping exercise, but it means when we meet with them, we understand their stage and their industry, and we can ensure that the resources and events are really bespoke into encouraging them to continue. These sessions connect them to stage-appropriate tools, and as well as other founders and business owners in our community. The other thing is these aren't a once-off, but they're encouraged to come back. So once they complete some tasks or some activities, to come back for additional resources. From these sessions, 13 startups were identified as high growth potential, and they went through to a panel session. And these are a deep dive into their business model. We work with professional service and established entrepreneurs to have a really focused session on what they're working on. 7 of these startups have gone on to be recommended to join the Distiller Incubator, and this is where they get the full weight of Startup Dunedin. They get fortnightly catch-ups, mentorship, founder-only lunches, and full wraparound support. The program is for our high-growth, high-scale startups, so they're looking to export or working towards product launch. And in 2021, we've seen how firming up of our pipeline's working, that these startups went over to raise over $2 million in 2021. Moreover, though, these startups continue to engage. They're mentoring our up-and-coming startups. They're building connections beyond our region, and most importantly, they're Dunedin's biggest advocates. In the wider community, we've supported events, community initiatives, and tried some new things. We've got a really exciting pilot with the Pacific Trust for a Pacifica startup and business support role. We've piloted a coaching the community to look at how we upskill the rest of our community to understand what supports exist. We've learnt alongside them to better understand what a Māori worldview looks like and how we can be better contributors to community-led entrepreneurship. We've mapped all the supports and we've created an eyesight-inspired map of all the resources to try and make wayfinding easier. And this resources exists beyond us, so this is for other offices and other community centres. We're working with Otako Runaka to understand the land in which we're working on and the history of where we are for a Te Reo Māori name for Startup Dunedin. We've continued to co-fund Mainland Angel Investment Network to host pitch evenings and investment education in Dunedin. We're piloting more workshops with the Highlanders and their families while they call Dunedin home. We saw Mararanga Tahi, a youth initiative piloted with our Ministry of Youth Development Innovate HQ, find a permanent home thanks to community partnerships with the Otago Community Trust and the Transition to Work Trust. And we're in conversations with the Putataraki Runaka as well for how we might share incubator services. So while we're doing some really great work in our community and we're looking hard at how we retain talent here, we're also continuing to learn what we can do better and where that fits in the wider ecosystem. We supported some research last year, which has gone on to receive more funding. And so we started with understanding all the support organisations in the city. We know that it's well connected, we know there's a great variety, but the next step is to understand these supports from the points of entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs. So what are their experiences? What support do they wish they had? And how might we strengthen the ecosystem as a city? The outcome of this study is going to be a co-created set of recommendations and initiatives that are there to be utilised by the city. So if you know anyone that you think should be part of these interviews, focus groups or workshops, please get them in touch. We know that high growth, innovative startups are needed to continue to keep Dunedin as a vibrant city. We know we need interesting jobs where our best and brightest can succeed. We know they solve problems in our community and the world's problems. And your support for these innovators and change makers has already made a difference. If you'd like to continue, because every startup pitch should finish with a good ask, on a more personal level, our biggest thing as we get more high growth startups is your connections. You're some of the best connected people in our city, and we often share what they need on our LinkedIn or through our newsletter. So if you have any of those connections, that's what our founders need most. As always, we always welcome your questions and feedback. We're interested in any activities that align in the startup ecosystem and where you see opportunities to enable the ecosystem to thrive beyond this year. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have some questions if you're happy to take them.
Of course.
Okay. Councillor Lord.
Thank you, Chair. Rachel, look, that was really interesting and the report's good to read too, but is there, I'm just unsure myself, is there any sort of business, I mean, any sort of legal business that you wouldn't allow to apply for startup? Like, can any idea effectively go through the process?
I'd love to know what all the giggling was around the table. The short answer is yes. So one of our values is that great ideas can come from anyone and anywhere. And so anyone can access that first step. And that first step is there to kind of scale up our resources. So if they're willing to do the work and they're a value add and they're passionate about what they do, if anyone was too small or too late and we were starting to say no, that becomes really challenging from a branding perspective. So we have to be a really safe, easy first step to ensure that we can triage them in the right places. We might not always be the right place though.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jamie and Rachel. Excellent report, really easy to read and fantastic presentation. I'm always encouraged within a report that you do touch on potential things you can improve on, and I think you touched on that a wee bit, and you highlight Maori Pacifica refugee groups, etc. And I think at the end you say, how do we get them involved? So do you want to expand a wee bit on how? I mean, it's a struggle for lots of organisations to include those groups. So how do you better do that?
So I've got a couple of methods. One is partnering with the community groups that are already well connected. So that coach the community is we don't need to hold all the information. So who can we work with to make it better accessible? What supports are out there? The second part is in the research we're supporting through the university. So understanding those groups really well, who's not being supported, so we can better target those places as well. So the second part of that research will happen this year, and that starts with really in-depth interviews for those that maybe have never accessed support and why, and then better understanding what initiatives and interventions can be co-created with those communities. Department of Social Work.
Mayor Hawkins.
Tēnā kōrua, me to you both for your work and for your presentation, and thanks for the ecosystem mapping stuff. Great to see that and acknowledge who we are missing and seeing a commitment to finding those people. I have two questions. One is around, and there are themes broadly around the the startups that are coming through. Some are food and beverage businesses, and a number of them are tech businesses. Are you doing any work collectively around the challenges that cloud-based platforms have around sustainability from an energy consumption point of view? Is that something that is being actively discussed within the startup community?
Actively discussed, yes. We're not doing anything specific, but part of what we do is making sure those events are in front of the right people when they do happen at a national level.
Okay. And the other question, speaking of things operating outside of our district, one of the things we're trying to do within economic development more broadly is work where we can at a regional level, whether that's destination marketing or whatever. Is that similarly something that is happening with other organisations similar to yours that operate in the wider region?
Can I get you to ask that in a slightly different way?
Are you working with other startup incubator type outfits in the wider region in a collaborative way?
Yeah, absolutely. So another one of our values is that facilitation and collaboration build a sustainable ecosystem. We know there's a high turnover around lots of areas of New Zealand. We catch up once every 6 weeks with every other organisation like ours, and we work a lot more closely with Southland and Queenstown, so we catch up most weeks with their teams as well. We're all small, we're all trying to do the same mahi, and so it's about sharing resources.
Great, thanks.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this exciting report. I've got a number of questions. Now, you've got 410 founders supported, and you said that you'd worked with 170 students. Where does the other broader spectrum of founders come from across the city?
Yeah, great question. A little bit of everywhere. So we catch up with the other business support organisations every so often as well. So Business South and regional business partners. And so we share around connections when they're relevant as well. But for the most part, that's a really great acknowledgement to Mackenzie's work in marketing. So she works very hard to make sure we're watching our language and we're in the right places. So that's entirely down to her.
Oh, that's exceptional. A question just around the creative spaces around Dunedin. You've got the startup space, you've got Innovate HQ, you've got Petri Dish, and I was just wondering how that ecosystem also helps your startups, because you do a lot of work across those.
Yeah, we're very lucky again that I guess it's a very open conversation. We catch up really regularly, so if we have startups that are outgrowing our space, we're in conversations about where they might go and what might be a good fit, and vice versa.
I might just add to that is we over the last year we've been redefining who can access the Startup Dunedin space, because I guess our job is to launch people, so they need to go out and contribute to the Dunedin economy as well. So getting them into places like Petri Dish where they can access those networks a lot more, rather than just having a free space to work in at Startup Dunedin. I think it's really important for them to build those networks and obviously contribute to those businesses as well. I think it's
Startup Dunedin co-working space is only available for those on Audacious or in the Distiller Incubator, with the idea is it's meant to get them started and they graduate out into other co-working spaces.
Councillor Elder, we are past the 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, I could ask heaps more, but I won't. I'll go and see you.
Yeah. Councillor Lefiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, tēnā kōrua. I'm referring to your mapping the ecosystem opportunities to improve. Where you say non-Māori organisations could do much more to help support the working class population of entrepreneurs. The term working class, is that from you or from your researchers?
From our researchers.
Okay, and
I shouldn't say our, it's very much their research that we're supporting. So.
Yeah, okay. From a governor to a governor, this question is for Mr Reddy. Strategically, what are you doing about your own organisation in terms of ethnicity on your board and addressing these issues strategically?
That's a good question, and that is something that we're working on at the moment, because we do have some board vacancies. And the board as a group has talked quite extensively with Rachel's input as well and the rest of the team about broadening our representation. And that has been very much a focus when we've been looking at the applications we had, and we were quite refreshed when we did put an expression of interest out at the number of people that applied. And we've narrowed that down. In fact, we're meeting with some people in the next week or two. So that's part of it, and working with some of those, like the Pacific Trust, to train people on that initial startup canvas thing is about trying to get those processes further out into those groups where we can see where people are interested in, and trying to get it into spaces and language and stuff that people are comfortable with, particularly with refugees, for example, where English is going to be very much a second language. So we think.
And finally, Councillor Gary.
My question's been asked and answered. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I think on behalf of the committee, thank you for the work you're doing. It's an amazing result for the year, and we look forward to what happens in this year that you're already well into. All right, councillors, into the meeting proper. We have apologies from Councillor Hall and Councillor Vandervis, so I will move that those be sustained. Seconded, Councillor Walker.
I think Councillor Houlihan has had to leave, but she will be back, so she'll be an apology for lateness.
All right, we will include Councillor Houlihan for lateness. Is that, you're happy with that, Councillor Walker? All right, I will put it. All in favour? Against? That is carried. Moving on, confirmation of the agenda. I'll move that the committee confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. Seconded, Councillor Benson Pope. All in favour? Against? That is also carried. Declarations of interest. Has anybody had a change in their interests in the last quarter of an hour? If not, I will note the elected members' interest register and confirm the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Seconded, Councillor Walker. All in favour? Against? That is carried. Confirmation of minutes. Economic Development Committee meeting the 5th of April 2022. I will move that the committee confirms the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting held on the 5th of April 2022 as a true and correct record. Seconded, Councillor Elder. Any discussion? If not, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That is carried. That brings us on to the Economic Development Committee Forward Work Programme. We have with us Mr. Liggett. If there are any questions. And Mr. West, yes. I assume you are happy to take questions?
Absolutely.
Councillor Gary.
Kia ora, Mr. Liggett, Mr. West. I just wanted to check in with you to understand the impact that COVID's had on, I kind of sense there's some pieces of work that have been delayed, and I'm assuming that COVID is responsible for that. Would that be correct in terms of the ongoing, with sometimes your suppliers and providers and consultants and staff?
Look, COVID certainly has had an impact on the work program. Equally, there's just some timing issues around the production of certain reports again as well, which probably have indirectly been affected by COVID as well. So
sure. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a brief question around the sister city line there, and of course in the context of our ongoing pandemic. Have there been Zoom communications or meetings that have kept that relationship alive?
They certainly have, Councillor. We've maintained in particular connection and contact with our sister city in Shanghai. Members of Enterprise Dunedin staff have also maintained contact with other sister cities in China and friendship cities, and we've maintained those relationships where possible and given the context with other cities that we're working with on specific projects. For instance, again, the Centre of Digital Excellence with some of the work that we do around with Edinburgh as well.
Any other questions? But, okay, it has been moved by Councillor Walker, seconded by Councillor Lord. Councillor Walker, does anybody wish to speak to this item? If not, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That is carried. That brings us to the Startup Dunedin Trust Annual Report.
Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Gary.
I just want to check in with you around a question that Councillor Lord asked, and I think it might have been misunderstood. Ms Butler may have, I'm not sure, I can't put words into. I'm sure you will, Councillor Lord. I thought that Councillor Lord was asking around a filter for the types of businesses, and I guess it was in a framework of what I'm thinking of, ethical businesses, or however that is determined. Is there any kind of filter or thought around that?
I would have to refer back to the trust, but I am confident that there would be in this instance.
And have there been any ongoing interest as a result of the Outside the Valley? That was certainly a triumph. Has that directly piqued anyone's interest outside of Dunedin, or maybe it's something that we can't quantify?
Unfortunately, I can't quantify that. However, it was certainly, we believe, a great piece of work, and it was a great opportunity to showcase the activity and the work that the Trust and the City's been doing in terms of investing in startup activities. So,
thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question just from something that Councillor Lefiso brought up about the representation across the trust, the Startup Dunedin Trust. And it looks like, I'm presuming that 3 are appointed. That would be the University of Otago, the City Council and the Polytech. Are those positions of appointment?
That's correct.
And then are the other 3 advertised?
I can't comment on exactly the process that it runs through there.
So do the current members of the board appoint the future members of the board?
That's my understanding.
And do they have a policy around that?
I can't answer that, I'm afraid.
Okay, I was going to ask another question about the service level agreement that we approved as well, and I'm just going to ask if those were possibly as policies in that, but given that you're obviously not the author of the report, is that a little challenging to answer?
We can certainly confirm within the service level agreement.
Yeah, that would be great to know. Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, Councillor Elder.
I was just going to ask about how the startup ecosystem has worked over the COVID period and what your thoughts are around that, because it's been very challenging. I mean, for us, we have to do everything Zoom. That face-to-face isn't happening the same.
I think the Trust actually touched on this in some of their report as well, but I suppose the beauty of working with the Trust is its agility and its ability to actually respond to some of the challenges that we have seen with COVID. I know that they have adapted a number of their programs to respond to what has been a challenging couple of years, but generally believe they've done a good job within that complex context.
Thank you.
No other questions? In that case, I am happy to move that the committee notes the summary of activity from the Startup Dunedin Trust for the year ended 31st of December 2021. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak to this? No? Councillor Elder.
I'm happy to speak to this. I believe that the Startup Trust has done an amazing job to energise the startup ecosystem in Dunedin, and I've seen a massive change across the city in the vitality and energy in this space. The mentoring, the support. If you ever want an exciting weekend, go to a startup weekend. I have. You don't get any sleep, but there's heaps and heaps of excited people out there, all sharing their ideas and very ably facilitated by this group. The one-on-one mentoring, the wraparound support, I have seen directly affect the outcomes of success for business. And I know Wineley and Cafe Logic really well, and they have really found that ecosystem brilliant because it's very hard. It's very hard to go from startup to actual having a business that is fully operational, and there's still, those ups and downs in the business space, but the startup ecosystem has invigorated people in Petri Dish and the supports around Petri Dish. I just think they do an exceptional job for a small group of people, and the distiller or the startup space has been really instrumental in people who can't afford to have a place to rent when their first idea comes to their head. They can't afford a place to rent. That startup space where other people have ideas and they're throwing them all around is such a wonderful place for people to get a start in business. And so I just congratulate the Startup Trust for the work they're doing, and really excited about the future ahead, particularly with working with other groups across the city, including Pacific Island and Māori, and I just support them in their work.
Councillor Gary.
I concur with my colleagues' comments, but I did want to say that I believe that this startup ecosystem is now an integral part of our city, and it's not something we had some years ago. I've certainly seen improvements and developments over the time that I've been on council, and I certainly think it's an essential element of the vibrancy of the city. It gives an opportunity to retain graduates in a particular way, and we're getting quite a name for ourselves. And when I attended the screening of Outside the Valley, I don't think I understood until I watched that how we have made our mark internationally, not just nationally but internationally, and that I felt pretty proud that night, as did the whole audience. And so that, there's still work to do, but delighted with the work being done by the Startup Trust, and I also like to acknowledge Ms O'Brien and Mr Liggett in terms of the leadership in that area. Thank you.
Councillor Radic.
Yes, I'd just like to make two comments, or a comment on two factors that give a very clear indication of just how successful this whole program is, which is very compelling for me. Firstly, the number of employees that these startup companies now have, which are, several, a few dozen by the look of it. But not only that, the amount of capital that they have raised in their own right, over $2 million, is quite significant. These just very small startup companies with students are really getting traction across the board, so very many of them are doing very well. Congratulations.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Something that Councillor Radic just said just sparked another important part of having Startup Dunedin, which is the attraction of students and migrants to the city. I have because my daughter's a student now, have had students say to me that one of the reasons that they came to study at Dunedin was because of things like Audacious, which gives them that opportunity to look at starting up their own business. I want to keep the script brief, but I would also like to commend the work. I get their weekly newsletter, which is excellent, and I've seen the map that they've put together of the startup support. I remember when startup support started in Dunedin, because I was working at Enterprise Dunedin there, and it's just come on in leaps and bounds, and it gladdens my heart to see the professionalism in the work that's being done nowadays.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add to the thanks that has already been offered to the trust and the staff at Startup Dunedin in particular for the work that they do, and just want to reiterate the comments that have been made and acknowledging them for acknowledging the work that is to be done to broaden the range of perspectives and that are involved as active participants in the startup ecosystem, and in particular people who might have great ideas but for whom words like startup and ecosystem and entrepreneurship are meaningless jargon as they can be, and doing the work within the community to meet with people on their own turf and on their own terms to try and redress the imbalances that we know exist within these communities, and likewise, similar sorts of things that we are trying to achieve as an organisation and as a governing body, and we won't always get it right in normal day, but it's commendable to be so proud of the commitment to doing that work, because that still sadly isn't as widespread as it could and should be. So all power to them. I think we're incredibly lucky to have a community that is as tightly knit and as supportive as the mapping exercise demonstrates in a world where territorialism and patch protection often reign supreme, and knowing that is happening not just across the city but across the wider region gives me great confidence in the support that we are able to offer people with ideas worth pursuing here in Dunedin. Thanks.
No other speakers? I'll just make a few comments. Back in 2006, there was a report done on the gaps that existed in the startup culture in Dunedin. And at that time, the report was pretty damning. It was the days when we had an organisation which was funded as Startup Dunedin is by the City Council, the Polytechnic, the university. I don't think that the government also had some funding in that, and it incubated 3 or 4 entrepreneurs. And in the end, it was decided that Upstart would move out of town, join Christchurch, and we were left with a small amount of money from the organisations that were funding Upstart to look at a new approach to growing entrepreneurship in the city. And that is what started Startup Dunedin. And I guess good things take time. The first few years were pretty rocky and difficult, but what we see now is an ever strengthening of the infrastructure that captures early startup, early entrepreneurs, and helps grow them on, and is building structures beyond that to support them as they get to a point where they can take their ideas to a finished product and on from there requiring investment. So one thing I will say is that I think this has been a tremendous success. It comes from a lot of effort that went in not only by the Trust but by Enterprise Dunedin in those early years, and Grow Dunedin Partnership were also involved. And I think we can all be proud of where it has got to and look forward to what comes from their efforts over the next few years. So with that, I will put it. All in favour? Aye. Against? That is carried. That brings us on to the Economic Development Activity Report, and we'll welcome to the table Louise van der Vliet and Robert West and Mr. Fraser. Mr. Fraser. Mr. Liggett. Do you wish to address anything in the report, or shall we just go to questions?
If I could just say that there was an email sent out earlier with a correction to page 49. The graphs on item 4, we've corrected some graphs that we picked up were incorrect. So you will have all received that by email. If I've got hard copies, if anyone wants a hard copy. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question about the first of those graphs on page 48, the satisfaction with council support for economic development. We had a bit of a discussion in two contexts yesterday about the usefulness of some of the questions in the ROS, and it seems to me that's a good example. I mean, I don't know how people in the community who are chosen, invited to participate, would know a rational answer, most of the community, to what the council does or doesn't do. Is that a fair assessment, or is there any way you think that a question like this can be refined so it gives us information rather than a bludgeon for us to hit ourselves with?
Thank you for the question. I understand that there is work going on around the ROS and the questions within there. Certainly there is a choice around these types of questions, and one of them, could be around a transactional approach in terms of your experience with. So we're just simply looking for the ability to tell the best story that we can. So we will continue to just work, I suppose, with the rest of the team around the redevelopment of the ROS and what questions we can actually put in there to accurately reflect the story that we want to be able to tell.
Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first question was answered. My second question is around film, and you may or may not be able to answer that, Mr. Liggett, but I'll ask it anyway. There was a certain famous New Zealand film celebrity noted in Dunedin recently, as per the media. And I wonder, you may not be able to say, but are we able to look forward to some exciting news soon, or is mum the word?
We welcomed the recent film scouting exercise to the city. Unfortunately, we're unable to really comment in any great detail about that, but as a film-friendly city, we're certainly welcoming any type of interest in any projects that we can.
Thank you for that careful answer, and just to acknowledge that is very exciting for our community to see that kind of interest. I also had a question about Study Dunedin and the comment about supporting the secondary school sector with shared ESOL and homestay provisions. How is that proceeding?
Study Dunedin's been working on a future focus plan as international borders start to reopen. We actually just had our Study Dunedin advisory group meeting this morning, and that work stream is one of 4 that have been identified by the group, as well as, so in addition to ESOL, there's homestay, work with our agents, and more of a discussion around how we think around international education going forward as a cohort.
So does that mean they're looking at, rather than all having their own individual ESOL, individual homestay efforts, individual delegations, that they're looking to combine, coordinate at this time? Is that the general thrust of it?
Generally, and that's it's generally the discussion we're going to start, and this is the opportunity that it creates to revisit those conversations. So each of those work streams will be led by a relevant part of the Study Dunedin Advisory Group, and that's the type of recommendations that we would, or options that we would certainly want to look at.
Wonderful. And final, very quick question, and the answer maybe we have no updates, but Louise, do you have any updates on cruise? We've had extensive discussions today about cruise and the uncertainty. Are there any recent updates in the last week or so?
No, really, the return of cruise is solely in the government hands, so it's a political decision as to when cruise will be allowed to return, and until then...
And we have no idea about when they might decide?
No certainty at all until the government pushes the go.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. My first one is just around the business clinics, and obviously we've just heard from Startup Dunedin Trust. So I was wondering, do we get more of a fulsome report about the business clinics? I see the numbers have leapt from, compared to 29 last period, to 37. Do we get a fuller report on that at some stage?
I can't recall actually if we have provided a full report on that, Councillor Barker, but we certainly collect more information around the nature of those clinics in terms of the sectors, so we do collect that information. I'm actually unclear whether or not we have actually provided that report previously.
Thank you. My next question is just around last week during the hearings, Business South came along and talked about some challenges around communication, and I just wondered, is there a plan to address some of those things, and can you kind of just...
Yes, there is. And so there's been communication this week, in fact, with both Mr Finhouse and Mr Collins about re-establishing their meetings. They'd been stopped with their restructure and then with COVID. So there's correspondence with the Mayor's office today about re-establishing those. And the Mayor and I are meeting with Mr Finhouse and Mr Collins about how we might fine-tune some of that communication.
Councillor Lafiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, tēnā koutou. My 2 questions relate to page 50. And I'm just asking quickly about the Startup Dunedin and the incubation services. What does exited startups mean? There's 4 of them.
Those are the ones that have exited the services that have been provided and the support that have been provided by Startup Dunedin.
Yes, they can work on their own. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then item number 9, job done. Those figures, the creation of new positions for that period, is that like typical or down or up or?
They're pretty consistent actually with last year actually. They are relatively typical, even though it has been a challenging environment.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions actually, and this is marketing campaigns and our performance target of growing 10% on year domestic visitor spend, and I just wanted to ask what the commentary was around our marketing when people came here, and congratulations on achieving that 10%.
So that's all been achieved with things going right back to our Plan D, and right now we're working on campaigns to support events that are coming up, and luckily one of our campaigns that was being rolled out last winter is going to be perfect to just roll in this winter again too for out of region. So it's keeping on with those campaign works and refreshing.
And just a bit of commentary around, in the paper the other day, the Air New Zealand said that actually Dunedin was the 4th desired destination in New Zealand to come to. Have you got any commentary around that?
No, I don't, other than that's Air New Zealand's figures, and that's fantastic, and we can just take it that our Plan D and the campaigns that have been running since then have contributed to that, to people wanting to come. It was an awareness campaign, it's worked, and it was fantastic to hear that it's the 4th in Air New Zealand's destinations.
That was exciting. And the other thing was people's experience of the eyesight. And to date, 100% of customers were satisfied with the experience. How do you measure that? And what is people's anecdotal feedback when they go there?
So we actually run a customer satisfaction program. So everybody that gets a ticket is actually asked to comment, give feedback, and they do that. In fact, and if they actually make a comment as well, as so they can just tick the boxes that they're satisfied or not. But then if they choose to comment, we actually get those flagged. I get those flagged, and if they give us the opportunity to go back and discuss anything with them, we can also do that. It's one of those things, the small numbers, as we noted here. The staff are able to spend more time and really ensure that we do meet the needs as much as possible. If we can't meet their needs, that people understand why, and that does influence your satisfaction. So it's we've always managed to be in the high 90s, but and the staff aim to do that 100% satisfaction, and when you're quieter, you have that opportunity. So,
well, look, I'd just like to add, and I think that it's a great question because it acknowledges the really fine work that the eyesight team have done under Louisa's leadership in what have been incredibly challenging times. And so I think that level of satisfaction is a testament to the professionalism and just what a stellar job they have done in really, really difficult times.
Councillor Lord.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I just had a question, like with our economic development goals, do we have a problem now with, I can't think of anyone that I know that desires full employment that hasn't got it, and I recognise that there's people that don't work, but by and large capable people have got jobs, and I'm just wondering, are our goals hindered by the low unemployment rate, or do we, because we can't just import people to fill jobs just to achieve our goals, and I'm just wondering at what point our goals get almost impossible to fill. Is that an issue?
Over time, they have changed. I think, Councillor Lord, that's what we've seen. We've seen evolution, I suppose, of the strategy, and we like to think the strategy being enabled, and we've seen the economic environment change considerably. And I think this is where the opportunity is when we relook at the economic development strategy going forward. It's an opportunity to revisit those goals. Do they get challenging going forward? Yes, yeah, that's different constraints, I suppose, within the economy. We are sitting at less than 4% now in terms of an unemployment rate. We are seeing growth, ironically, in terms of our the GDP per capita still, but we need to have some goals and some targets to sort of set and move forward. So they are challenging, but it's an opportunity as we look at the next version of the EDS to.
That GDP per capita, is that something that we're achieving? So that's we are achieving that at a rate faster than the rest of the country, is what you're meaning? We are lifting again.
Certainly faster than we have been ourselves, and there's probably some reasons for that in terms of, I suppose, constraints we've talked around in terms of border settings again as well more recently. So. There are reasons there which Mr. Patterson is helping us work through, but we are certainly seeing some progress within the GDP per capita goal.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Just two more questions. I've become aware, and I've been quite surprised in terms of the timing and its interaction with COVID, the number of people I have come across in recent times, probably the last month or month and a half, who have moved to Dunedin from other parts of New Zealand. What is your sense of that in terms of people shifting here?
Probably can only provide it anecdotally, Councillor Gary. We're certainly aware of people that are still seeing Dunedin as a compelling destination to come here in terms of what is happening within the city, in terms of business opportunities, job opportunities, but equally we're certainly seeing that coming through. It's again not without its challenges within there, but we're certainly seeing a good degree of visibility over activities that we are doing, and certainly people coming to the city. There's still a challenge and a demand, a competition for labour though, and skills. So that's certainly an area that we still are conscious that we need to continue to work on.
And my second question is around migrants from overseas and particularly to fill job shortages. We heard from Mr Collins in the annual plan from Business South around the challenges employers are having. What is your take on it? What are you hearing from your networks around that?
It's certainly been identified as a challenge as well in terms of the connections and contacts that we have across the board. Yes, in the range of industries and occupations as well.
Okay, thank you.
So that regionally, chief executives from the various authorities are doing some work on this because it's an issue common to everyone, and there's no point in competing with each other. It's about how we can work together as a region and harness the things that are unique and good about Dunedin and Queenstown and Clutha, must be some, and then what we can do so as we don't all go after the same electrician or the same plumber or the same policy person. So that work is starting to happen at a regional level.
No other questions? Would someone like to move? Councillor Gary, moving the recommendations, seconding. Councillor Elder. Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Mr Chair. It's always a pleasure to read of the activities in the economic development space, and there are plenty of them, but obviously impacted by COVID. I think the exciting thing for me, whenever I read these reports, is the opportunities, and we've certainly got opportunities even at a time that has had considerable challenges. And I always recall the what I believe is the symbol for the Chinese symbol for crisis, which is, I believe, also opportunity, and I've remembered that over many, many years. And some of those opportunities in this report are, for example, the Study Dunedin opportunities of sharing resources. There are opportunities as we progress with the destination plan and think about visitors to the city. There are continuing opportunities with film, and we've been informed in past times about the potential there, and we know that there is extraordinary potential, that people are recognising this city for its capability for the heritage elements, the scenery in terms of a backdrop for film. I too want to note, because I made it a habit prior to COVID of walking through the eyesight every single morning when I came to work, and often it was on busy visitor days, busy cruise ship days, to see the staff at work, and I'm very aware of the challenges they've had in recent times, but the quality of the service that they deliver continues to be at the highest, and I always feel a great sense of pride because customer service is really important to me. It's not something we're particularly good at in the city generally, but I can say hand on heart I've witnessed exceptional customer service from our eyesight staff, and it is delightful to hear they've had the time, because of the lower numbers, to improve that quality even further and go the extra mile even further for the visitors to the city, and I'm sure that people will remember that. I'm very aware from those anecdotal comments that I've had made to me over recent times, as I mentioned in my question, about migrants to our city, and they touch various aspects of this activity report, but our city continues to be a place that attracts people for the lifestyle, for the education, for the work opportunities. And even as I've gone around this building, I've met a number of people who've moved to the city, and it's always interesting to hear why. So our city continues post-COVID to be attractive, and I note a listener article recently about people moving out of the bigger cities and the attraction to moving to other cities, and people reflecting on that through the COVID experience and where they want to be. So our city continues to be strong. I thank the Enterprise Dunedin team for all of their work through the period, and the progress that we're making in so many ways and continue even in challenging times.
Councillor Elder.
Just a quick comment, and why I asked the questions was, it's really great to see Dunedin's share of the national domestic visitor spend to achieve its target of growing 10% a year. So I think that's due in part to a really fantastic and kind of wacky marketing campaign. I saw the billboards in Wellington Airport, and they were pretty impressive, and I was very proud of ourselves. The other thing is that even in hard pressed times, the staff at the Eyesight Centre, instead of letting their heads hang low, took pride in presenting Dunedin at their best, and I think customer service is certainly something that's really, really important, and actually leaves a really big mark on people as they come, visit and leave and tell their stories. So I just wanted to comment on those too, because I think economic development have really done well in that space as in many other spaces.
Before I pass to Councillor Gary for her right of reply, I just want to follow up on a comment made on some of the indicators that are measuring Enterprise Dunedin's performance and whether our strategy and the goals within it are still valid. And I think while the basic structure of our strategy is still pretty good, I think time has moved on, and for some time I have felt that we need to review that strategy and certainly do some work on how we measure our goals, because I think the city has areas that are of huge potential that we don't measure progress in. This is a city that has a wonderful way of life, and we fail to measure whether we are improving that or not. And I think for our economic development, we need that indicator to be looking positive. How people feel about our city is a very important aspect of whether they would ever consider coming and living here. So there is certainly some work to be done, and I'm sure that once we get the framework sorted out, that we will have an opportunity to update that and get some more appropriate measures. And I'd also just like to thank the Enterprise Dunedin team again for their work. In spite of the strategy getting a bit tired, it hasn't stopped a lot of great things happening in the team. And I'm sure they'll just keep battling on whether we have changed our strategy or not. Councillor Gary, your right of reply.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, that marketing campaign certainly has continued to make me smile every time I look at the posters. And it's really encouraging to be able to feel pride. You know, so often we get air-bashed for the things we get wrong, but there is so much to be proud of in terms of this area. And I just want to touch on too, there was mention earlier of business connections and communicating with businesses, and I recall, you know, after lockdown or during that post period, Mr. Adamson and the team walking the streets, and Mr. Christie walking the streets to talk to businesses, and that business connection continues. And we can always improve that. It's a two-way street, but I know there is work that is going on, and maybe we don't sing it from the rooftops loud enough. Councillor Staines talked about the measures, and yes, in fact, that was a question I was going to ask, because how on earth would many of the people answering that know what in fact we do in terms of support in terms of economic development. So I look forward to refresh of those measures, and I note the refresh of the strategy is overdue. I think we'd all agree with that. And I think the final comment would be to say we have a great little city here. It's a great small city. We have a great story to tell, such positive stories to tell. We just need to tell them in a louder voice, I think, and continue to tell them with quirkiness and the kind of innovation that marketing campaign has shown.
With that, I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. That brings us to our final item, items for consideration by the Chair. There are none. With that then, thank you councillors. I will close the meeting.
Councillors, remember we've got a briefing now on some transport. Which transport?